The Corridor Without Applause. March 22, 1968. The Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. The applause upstairs was still echoing faintly through the marble corridors when Dean Martin stepped away from the spotlight. The showroom had been electric that afternoon, cigarette smoke curling toward crystal chandeliers, laughter rolling like thunder across velvet walls. Dean had done what he always did, made it look effortless. A glass in hand, a half smile, a voice smooth as aged bourbon. But the stage was only one version of the man. Backstage, the air changed. The glitter fell away. Sequins became dust. Music dissolved into the hum of air ducts and service elevators. Dean preferred it that way. He walked through the employee corridor instead of the guest hallway, nodding quietly at kitchen staff and bellmen. No applause here, just work, real work, dishes clinking, linen carts rolling, shoes squeaking against tile. There was something grounding about it. He had learned long ago that fame was fragile. The stage loved you tonight and forgot you tomorrow. But the people in these hallways, the ones who showed up at 6 a.m., whether anyone noticed or not, they were solid. He loosened his tie slightly and turned the corner toward the service elevator. That's when he heard it. The slow rhythm of a mop dragging across tile. Not rushed, not careless. Measured. He glanced over casually, and something about the posture made him pause. The woman pushing the mop bucket stood tall. Too tall almost, her back straight, her movements deliberate, no slouching, no mechanical fatigue. She worked with quiet precision, wringing the mop with practiced hands. Most of the cleaning staff hurried through these corridors like they were racing the clock. She moved like time answered to her. Dean slowed. There was a stillness around her that didn't belong in a hotel hallway. The fluorescent lights reflected faintly off silver streaks woven through dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Her uniform was simple gray, standard Sands housekeeping issue, but she wore it like it was a pressed lab coat. She leaned slightly to empty the mop, and Dean saw her hands. Long fingers, steady, intentional. He felt something shift inside his chest. Those hands, he had seen them before. Not holding a mop. Holding him. The woman turned. Their eyes met. And the corridor vanished. February 1952. Chicago. Dean was 28 years old and already exhausted in ways applause couldn't fix. The partnership with Jerry Lewis was at its peak. Sold-out shows, radio appearances, movie deals, 2 shows a night at the Chicago Theater, travel, interviews, cigarettes, whiskey. Repeat. He remembered laughing backstage before the second show, feeling slightly off, blaming it on lack of sleep. Then the pressure hit. It wasn't sharp at first, more like a tightening fist inside his chest. He tried to breathe through it. Tried to joke through it. Then the fist squeezed harder. The dressing room blurred. He hit his knees. Jerry's voice echoed somewhere above him, frantic high breaking through panic. Somebody call an ambulance. The next memories were fractured. White ceiling lights rushing overhead. Cold hands cutting through his shirt. A stretcher jolting over pavement. A voice saying something about arrhythmia. He was 28. Heart attacks didn't happen at 28. Except they did. Chicago General Hospital. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and bureaucracy. He remembered a male voice, clinical, distant. Transfer him. Another voice, sharper. He's unstable. A pause. He's not our responsibility. Even through the fog of pain, Dean sensed something wasn't right. Then she entered. He never forgot the sound of her shoes on tile. Confident. Measured. Move. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Dr. Maria Rossi. Italian surname, female physician, young for her position. Unapologetic for either. She assessed him in seconds. Pulse irregular, skin pale, oxygen dropping. This patient stays. Someone objected. She ignored it. Orders were given, equipment prepared, cardiac unit alerted. Dean drifted in and out, but he remembered one thing clearly, her voice near his ear. You're going to be fine, Mr. Martin. Stay with me. Not sugar-coated. Not dramatic. Certainly. For 4 hours she fought for him. Against his failing heart. Against hospital politics. Against colleagues who preferred paperwork to risk. And she won. Back in 1968, in the Sands corridor, time snapped back into place. The mop bucket squeaked slightly as she shifted her weight. She knew. He saw it in her eyes. Recognition. Then restraint. She looked down immediately. "I'm sorry, sir," she said softly. "I think you're mistaken." But Dean's pulse was loud in his ears now. "Dr. Rossi." The mop stopped moving. Silence pooled between them. Employees passed without noticing the moment unfolding in that narrow corridor. She finally looked up. And there it was, the same steadiness, a little more lined by time, but unmistakable. "Mr. Martin," she said. No drama. No fanfare. Just acknowledgement. He felt something he hadn't expected. Shame. Not for anything he had done, but for not knowing. For 16 years he had lived, performed, laughed, raised children, built a career that spanned continents. And the woman who had made that possible was mopping hotel floors. "How?" he asked quietly. She glanced down the hallway, instinctively cautious. "Please," she said, "I'm working." The dignity in that sentence hit harder than any accusation could have. Dean lowered his voice. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything. I was doing my job." He almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. No, she had done far more than her job. And now she stood in a gray uniform under humming fluorescent lights, while gamblers upstairs lost more in an hour than she probably made in a month. "Tell me what happened," he said. She hesitated, and in that hesitation was a story heavy enough to bend steel. The service elevator doors opened behind them with a metallic groan. Two cooks walked past, arguing about inventory. The world continued, but something irreversible had just begun. Dean Martin, the man who could charm presidents and silence a ballroom with a single note, stood speechless in a back hallway, staring at the quiet hero who had once refused to let him die. And he realized something unsettling. He had spent years perfecting applause, but he had never once looked for the hands that steadied him when no one was clapping. The mop handle rested upright now. Between them, like a line drawn by history. And Dean understood, with a clarity sharper than stage lights. This wasn't coincidence. It was reckoning. The woman in the service corridor. The Sands Hotel shimmered like a jewel box under the Nevada sun. It was March 22, 1968, and Las Vegas was doing what it did best, pretending nothing outside its neon glow existed. Inside the showroom, the chandeliers still trembled faintly from applause. The air smelled of perfume, whiskey, and warm stage lights. Dean Martin had just finished rehearsal. The band had packed up. The technicians were adjusting microphones for the evening show. Somewhere down the hallway, someone laughed too loudly, the kind of laugh meant to impress. Dean loosened his tie as he stepped away from the stage. He always felt a strange quiet after rehearsal. Not loneliness, something else, like stepping off a moving train. The world slowed, the applause drained away. What remained was the man beneath the tuxedo. He chose the employee corridor instead of the guest hallway. He often did. Back there, no one expected a performance. No one asked for autographs. The floors weren't polished marble, they were scuffed tile. The walls weren't velvet, they were painted concrete. Real. He liked real. As he turned the corner near the service elevator, he heard it. The slow swish of a mop across tile. Not hurried, not resentful. Steady. He glanced over without thinking, and then he stopped walking. The woman pushing the mop bucket stood upright, almost regal in posture. Most of the cleaning staff worked bent forward, shoulders heavy from long shifts. This woman carried herself differently. Even in a gray housekeeping uniform, there was composure in the way she moved. Her hair, dark with silver threads, was pulled into a precise bun. No loose strands, no carelessness. She wrung the mop with controlled pressure. Her hands, Dean's breath caught. Long fingers, steady wrists, deliberate movement. Not the hands of someone defeated by life. The hands of someone trained to hold something fragile. The woman turned slightly to adjust the bucket. And he saw her face. Time folded. Chicago, February 1952. Dean was 28 years old. Too young to think about mortality, too busy to consider limits. He and Jerry Lewis were riding the kind of success that felt invincible. Sold-out crowds, 2 shows a night, endless travel, endless cigarettes, endless pressure to be funny, charming, unstoppable. That night backstage at the Chicago theater, something felt wrong. At first it was just tightness. Then pain. Not sharp, crushing. Like a fist pressing inward from inside his ribs. He tried to stand, the room tilted, sweat poured down his temples. Jerry's voice cut through the noise, panicked high. Dean. Then the floor came up fast. The next moments blurred into white lights and ambulance sirens. Chicago General Hospital. The emergency room buzzed with clipped instructions and cold efficiency. Dean drifted in and out of awareness, but he remembered the sound of disagreement. He's unstable. We'll transfer him. He won't survive transfer. A pause. Then a voice calm, firm. He stays. That was the first time he heard her. Dr. Maria Rossi. She stepped forward like someone accustomed to resistance, young for her position, one of the few female physicians on staff, Italian-American in a hospital that valued conformity more than courage. She didn't argue loudly. She simply refused to step aside. Dean remembered fragments, oxygen mask pressed to his face, hands checking his pulse, monitors beeping irregularly. And her voice close to his ear. Stay with me, Mr. Martin, you're not done yet. The attending physician objected. Policies were cited, protocols mentioned. She ignored them. For 4 hours she worked. Arrhythmia, stress-induced cardiac instability, early signs of coronary damage. Too young, they said. Too exhausted, she knew. When he finally slipped into stable rhythm, it wasn't applause that greeted the moment. Just relief. And a woman removing her gloves with trembling fingers no one else noticed. When Dean woke the next morning, she was gone. He was told he'd had a serious episode, that he needed rest, that he was lucky. No one mentioned insubordination hearings, or reprimands, or consequences. He left Chicago determined to slow down. He didn't. Life moved forward. He assumed she had too. Back in 1968, the corridor air felt thinner. The woman holding the mop bucket looked at him fully now. Recognition flashed across her eyes. Then something else. Guarded distance. Mr. Martin, she said quietly. Her voice had not changed. Not the tone. Not the steadiness. He felt 28 again, vulnerable, horizontal on a hospital bed. Dr. Rossi, he said. She inhaled slowly. I think you have me confused. No, he replied softly, I don't. A cart rattled past them. A bellhop hurried by with folded linens. The hotel hummed on unaware. Dean studied her face more closely. Time had carved gentle lines around her mouth. Silver had woven itself into her hair, but the composure remained intact. What are you doing here? He asked, the question leaving him before he could soften it. She glanced down the hallway instinctively, not ashamed but cautious. I work here, she said simply. That sentence hit him harder than any accusation. You were one of the best doctors in Chicago. She gave a small, almost amused exhale. That was a long time ago. There was no bitterness in her tone. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You saved my life. Her eyes flickered. You were my patient. No, he said, I was your risk. Silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. For 16 years he had performed under chandeliers and spotlights, shaking hands with politicians, singing for presidents, flying private while the world applauded. And the woman who kept his heart beating was standing in a service corridor holding a mop. There was no drama in her posture. No self-pity. Only dignity. That made it worse. "How long?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because she knew the question carried weight. 2 years, she said. He swallowed. 2 years in this hallway. 2 years within earshot of applause that wasn't hers. He noticed something then, the way she held the mop. Not as surrender. As task. Whatever she did fully. Even this. A strange emotion moved through him, not guilt exactly, something deeper. Reckoning. He had spent his life mastering the art of being seen. She had spent hers doing what was right whether anyone looked or not. And suddenly the applause upstairs felt insufficient. The elevator doors opened with a metallic groan behind them. She stepped slightly aside to let a maintenance worker pass. Professional, composed. He realized something in that moment that unsettled him more than the memory of chest pain. She had never expected recognition. Not then. Not now. And maybe that was what made her extraordinary. Dean Martin, singer, actor, entertainer, stood in a service corridor unable to find the smooth words that usually came so easily. Because this wasn't about charm. This was about debt. And for the first time in years, he felt the full weight of it. He looked at her hands again. The same hands that steadied his failing heart. Now steadying a mop bucket. History had folded them into this hallway. And he understood something with quiet certainty. This meeting was not an accident. It was unfinished business. The cost of making it right. The Sands showroom was full that night. Crystal chandeliers glowed like suspended stars. The orchestra swelled. Waiters slipped between tables balancing cocktails and secrets. Cigarette smoke curled toward velvet ceilings as laughter rolled across the room. Dean Martin stepped into the spotlight. The applause came instantly, warm, thunderous, automatic. He smiled, but something had shifted. He sang the first number smoothly, voice rich and effortless. The audience swayed. Women leaned forward. Men raised glasses. It looked like every other night in Las Vegas. But between verses, his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room. To the service door. He knew she was somewhere in the building. Not in a gown. Not at a table. Working. The thought pressed against his ribs harder than stage fright ever had. For 16 years he had told himself he was self-made. Hard work, talent, timing. But that wasn't true. 16 years earlier, in a Chicago hospital, a woman had chosen to risk her career instead of letting him be transferred out of convenience. He had walked away with applause. She had walked away with consequences. That realization didn't sit quietly. The next morning, Dean didn't sleep in. He didn't linger over coffee. He called his manager. "I need Sunrise Hospital's board chairman at lunch." There was a pause on the other end. "That's unusual," his manager said carefully. "This about the charity gala." "No," Dean replied, "it's about justice." By noon, he was seated at a private table in a quiet restaurant off the Strip. Across from him sat Dr. William Hartwell, chief of staff at Sunrise Hospital, a newer facility trying to build a reputation for innovation and integrity. Dean didn't ease into the story. He told it plainly. Chicago, 1952, cardiac crisis, a physician who intervened when others hesitated. Then he described the hallway. The mop. The uniform. Hartwell listened without interruption. When Dean finished, there was silence. "You're asking me to reinstate a physician who hasn't practiced in 8 years, Hartwell said carefully, and whose record likely includes disciplinary action. "I'm asking you to look at why," Dean replied. Hartwell studied him. "This isn't publicity, is it?" Dean's expression hardened slightly. "If I wanted publicity, I'd call a press conference. This is private." Another silence. "You understand she would need to retake boards," Hartwell said. "Recertify, prove competency. That's not a favor, that's a mountain." Dean leaned forward. "Then we make sure she has time to climb it." That evening, Dean walked back through the service corridor. He found her near the linen storage room. She was replacing supplies on a cart, movements methodical. When she saw him, she straightened slightly, not submissive, not expectant, simply attentive. "I spoke with Sunrise Hospital," he said. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Martin." "Dean," he corrected gently. She exhaled. "You shouldn't be doing this." "Why?" "Because your gratitude doesn't obligate the world to rewrite the past." The sentence surprised him. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was protecting him from disappointment. "It doesn't rewrite the past," he said quietly. "It corrects the present." She looked at him steadily. "I haven't held a scalpel in 8 years." "But you still think like a physician," he replied. "I can see it." Something flickered in her eyes, not hope, memory. He handed her a folder. Inside were details: board recertification requirements, preparatory courses, financial arrangements quietly handled. She stared at the paperwork longer than necessary. "You've already decided," she said. "No," he answered. "You decide, I just remove obstacles." For a moment, the hallway seemed too small to hold the weight of what stood between them. "I am 54 years old," she said finally. "You know what residency means at 54. "Yes," he said calmly. "It means experience." A faint, unwilling smile touched her mouth. "You're very persuasive." "I sing for a living," he replied. "Persuasion pays the bills." But his tone softened. "Maria, you once told me my heart was stronger than I thought. I didn't believe you then, but I believe something now." She waited. "You didn't stop being a doctor because a board voted against you. You stopped because the system pushed you out." Silence. "And I'm in a position to push back." Her composure cracked just slightly. "Not into tears. Into conflict." For years she had built a life around acceptance. Survival, quiet work, no expectation. Hope was dangerous. "You don't owe me redemption," she said. He shook his head. "This isn't redemption, it's recognition." The word hung between them. Recognition. Not applause. Not charity. Acknowledgement. Her hands rested on the cart handle, steady but no longer rigid. "If I fail," she said quietly, "I fail publicly." "Then you fail trying," he replied, "but I don't think you will." For the first time, she looked uncertain. "Not weak. Just human." "I'll need time," she said. "You have it. And if I say no?" He nodded once. "Then I still thank you, and I still owe you." She studied him for a long moment, measuring sincerity the way she once measured heart rhythms. Finally, she closed the folder gently. "I will sit for the boards," she said. The words were simple, but they carried 16 years of silence breaking. Dean felt something loosen inside him, not triumph, relief. Not because he had solved something, but because she had chosen. Weeks passed. She resigned from housekeeping quietly. No speeches, no spectacle. Dean arranged tutoring sessions discreetly. Study materials arrived. A modest apartment replaced a rented room. But the real work was hers. Long nights, medical journals, refresher courses, anatomy texts reopened with hands that once knew them by instinct. Doubt crept in often. She hadn't practiced medicine in nearly a decade. Procedures had evolved, protocols updated. But knowledge is not easily erased. It waits. One evening, Dean stopped by unannounced with dinner. He found her surrounded by textbooks, glasses perched low on her nose, hair pulled back tighter than usual. "You look like finals week," he joked softly. She didn't look up. "It feels worse." He set the food down. "You don't have to prove anything to me." She finally met his eyes. "I'm not proving anything to you." A beat. "I'm proving something to myself." That answer told him everything. This was never about charity. It was about dignity reclaimed. 3 months before the board exam, she received a letter from Chicago. A former colleague. The tone was neutral. But the message was clear. Some believed she was overreaching. It rattled her more than she admitted. That night she nearly quit. Dean found her sitting alone on her balcony, the desert wind cool against the city lights. "Tell me something," he said quietly as he joined her. She didn't respond. "When you wheeled me upstairs in 1952, were you certain?" She closed her eyes briefly. "No, I was terrified." "Then why did you do it?" "Because the alternative was worse." He nodded. "Same answer." She looked at him, and slowly the fear receded. The day of the exam arrived. Dean didn't attend. He waited. Hours passed. When the call finally came, her voice was calm. "I passed," she said. Not triumphant. "Certain." He closed his eyes briefly. "Doctor," he replied. There was silence on the line. Then the faintest laugh. But part 3 does not end in celebration. Because passing the boards was only the threshold. Next would come the hospital floor. The scrutiny. The proving. And the moment when the world that once dismissed her would have to decide whether it recognized strength or feared it. And this time, she would not be alone. The night the heartbeat returned. The first shift was the hardest. Sunrise Hospital's emergency department hummed with the sharp, controlled urgency of real medicine. Fluorescent lights, rolling carts, monitors pulsing with steady electronic rhythms. Dr. Maria Rossi stood at the edge of the nurses' station wearing a white coat again. Her name stitched neatly above her heart. Maria Rossi, MD. The letters felt heavier than she remembered. Some of the younger staff glanced at her discreetly. They knew her story, at least parts of it. The board reinstatement, the gap in her career, the quiet sponsorship from a well-known entertainer. People were polite, professional, but watchful. Medicine forgives slowly. She didn't blame them. Trust in a hospital is not given. It is earned in seconds that matter. And the seconds came sooner than expected. 2 hours into her shift, the ambulance doors burst open. Male mid-50s, severe chest pain, irregular rhythm. The paramedics wheeled the gurney inside. The patient was pale, clutching his chest, sweat beading across his forehead. The monitor beeped erratically. Maria didn't hesitate. "Get me vitals, prep IV, oxygen at 10 liters. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't pause. The room snapped into motion around her. For a brief flicker of time, memory overlapped reality. Chicago, 1952. Another man, another failing rhythm. But she didn't drift. She focused. The EKG printout rolled from the machine. Arrhythmia. Dangerous but reversible. "Stay with me," she told the patient calmly. "You're not done yet." The words landed with familiarity. Within minutes, medication stabilized the rhythm. Color slowly returned to the man's face. The monitor found a steadier beat. The room exhaled. Maria stepped back slightly, letting the nurses take over. No applause. Just breath restored. One of the younger doctors approached her afterward. "Textbook call," he said quietly. She gave a small nod. "It's rarely textbook," she replied. "It's pattern recognition." He smiled faintly. Respect begins in small exchanges. Across town that evening, Dean Martin stood in his dressing room before showtime. He hadn't told anyone at the Sands where he was earlier that day. He didn't need publicity. But he did need to know. A nurse had called him briefly after the shift ended. "She handled it like she never left," the nurse said. Dean sat down slowly. 16 years ago, she had stood over him in a hospital room while his future flickered uncertainly. Now she stood in another emergency room, steady as ever. He felt something settle deep inside him, not pride. Completion. Weeks passed. Maria took every shift offered. Night rotations, weekends, holidays. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't mention Chicago. She simply worked. And slowly the glances shifted. Curiosity softened into confidence. Confidence deepened into trust. One afternoon, the hospital administrator requested a meeting. Not disciplinary. Strategic. We're launching a women's cardiac health initiative, he explained. Your background, your experience, it's uniquely suited. She listened carefully. In 1952, few had taken women's cardiac symptoms seriously. Even fewer studied how stress uniquely affected female patients. She had always cared about that. Now someone was asking her to lead it. I'll need autonomy, she said calmly, and funding directed toward underserved patients. The administrator smiled slightly. You negotiate like someone who's been here for decades. I negotiate like someone who knows what matters, she replied. The program launched 6 months later. It wasn't flashy. It was necessary. Meanwhile, Dean prepared for something of his own. Not a performance. A dedication. Sunrise Hospital had expanded its cardiac wing. They asked him to attend the ribbon cutting. He agreed on one condition. Her name would be on it. She argued at first. I don't need a building named after me. It's not about ego, he said gently. It's about memory. On the day of the ceremony, the Nevada sun burned bright against the hospital facade. A small crowd gathered, staff, donors, patients whose lives had intersected with hers. The plaque was unveiled. The Maria Rossi Center for Emergency Cardiac Care. Applause followed. She stood quietly, hands folded in front of her coat. Dean stepped to the microphone. He didn't tell a dramatic version of Chicago. He didn't exaggerate. He told the truth. There was a night in 1952 when I stopped breathing the way I should have, he began. A young doctor refused to let procedure outrank life. The crowd stilled. I built a career on stage presence, he continued, but she built hers on courage when no one was watching. He paused. For 16 years, I didn't know what it cost her. That ignorance sits heavier than any spotlight. He turned toward her. Gratitude isn't applause, it's action. The words carried. Maria didn't cry, but her composure softened. Not because of the building, because she had been seen. Fully, not as a scandal, not as a suspended physician, as what she always was. A doctor. Years later, when Dean Martin passed away in 1995, Maria stood at his memorial service. The church was filled with celebrities, musicians, old friends. When she approached the podium, there was quiet curiosity. She wasn't from Hollywood. She was from a hallway. He once told me I saved his life, she said calmly. What he never understood is that meeting him again saved mine. The audience listened. He reminded me that sometimes recognition comes late, but when it comes, it restores more than reputation. It restores purpose. She looked toward the casket. You kept your promise, Dean. You paid your debt and then some. The Maria Rossi Center continued long after both of them were gone. Thousands of patients passed through its doors, regardless of wealth, surname, or background. A small inscription remained in the lobby. Every life has equal value. Healing begins with seeing it. Visitors rarely knew the full story, but the story lived in every steady heartbeat that left that building. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between applause and anonymity, two people had proven something simple. Sometimes the person you save returns to save you. Not with drama, not with noise, but with recognition. And sometimes, that is enough.